Hi all, welcome back. In this lecture, we will discuss challenges associated with microservices security. So let's get started. So the first challenge is broader the attack surface, higher the risk of attack. So what does it mean? In monolith application, all of the components were running in the same process. So they interact within the same process. But now each microservice is independent and communicate to each other over the remote calls. Also, our monolith application was having only couple of entry points. Now we have large number of entry points which significantly broadens the attack surface, which increases the risk of attacks. Microservices expose new entry points to both internal and external actors. Access control need to be regulated for all entities, whether legitimate or illegitimate. It's important to have an administrative interface that can help you manage users, applications, groups, devices, and APIs from one central location. Next challenge is distributed security screening at each microservices. In monolith application, we have to do security screening only once at the interceptor layer. After that, request will be dispatched to the corresponding component. But now we have to do security screening at each microservices endpoint, which is redundant and difficult to manage. Some do work around by trusting the network, where requests coming within network zone will be considered valid without any check. But as we discussed, industry is moving towards zero trust security. Trusting the networks becomes anti-pattern. Next challenge is establishing trust is difficult because of deployment complexities. It is difficult to manage deployment of large number of services. It is common that organization can grow into the hundreds or thousands of microservices. Considering such a large number of microservices having ephemeral deployment makes it difficult to manage deployment and establish trust for secure inter-service communication. Next challenge is distributed tracing and logging. It is important to trace requests and maintain logging of services in order to preserve accountability so that logs and traces can be used for forensic analysis and real-time analysis. Tracing and logging requests across different independent microservices is difficult and need distributed tracing and logging aggregation tools like Jaeger and Jipkins. Next challenge is immutable containers. Most of the microservices deployment uses Docker containers for deployment. Each microservice runs in its own container. These containers are immutable. It means that once the container spins up, we cannot change it. Container immutability is important for scaling and failover, as in case of scaling or failover, it will spin up new container from the Docker image and won't be able to preserve the state. Because immutability of containers and dynamic nature of policies, you cannot store access policies in the containers. We need a way to push or pull policies from the central policy administration endpoint. Also, the microservices image, aka Docker image, needs to be scanned for vulnerability with the tools like Twistlog. Next challenge is sharing the user context. In monolith application, all components were sharing the same web session through which they share the user context. Sharing user context across independent stateless microservices is difficult. User need to pass user context across microservices securely. JSON Web Token, also known as the JWT or JWT, is one of the way of doing it. In upcoming lecture, we will see how to overcome the challenges. Thank you. See you in the next lecture.